Kia ora and welcome to another episode of the Leadership Lounge, a space for healthcare leaders to take a break, to take a moment to pause, to think, reflect and get a fresh perspective on the work that they do. I'm Katie, I'm your host. I've worked in healthcare for 3 decades and I now work with leaders and their teams to help them manage the demands and the complexity of the work as it is, the reality of it, so that you can feel supported, encouraged and hopeful about the stuff that you get to do. So this week I was reflecting back. It's an image I can't get out of my mind. I was helping facilitate a leadership development course at a hospital, and at the end of the course, there's this kind of celebration event where all the people that have taken part share their reflections and what they got from the whole course, and it was great. I was blown away by the whole event. I was not expecting to feel so emotional through it. But there was one person that stood up and shared some things that really, really stood in my mind. Everyone shared something really incredible. But they stood up and they read this story, and this very short story. So I was like, okay, that was really a really beautiful introduction. So I'm going to start with a version of the story that they shared, and then that's going to lead into the sort of the topic that I was going to explore on this week's Leadership Lounge. So here we go. So there are 2 woodcutters who were in a competition to see who could cut down more trees by the end of the day. So the first was an experienced woodcutter older in years, and the second was a younger, stronger man eager to prove his ability. By the way, I was going to try and change the men bit to gender neutral. I failed already at the start, so let's just see how this keeps going. So both of them set out chopping. And then after about an hour or so, the more experienced person paused and sat down to take a break. He invited the other person to join him. The younger, stronger woodcutter said, no way, I'm going to keep chopping. I'm going to beat you. Do yourself, the other one said. So this pattern repeated itself several times throughout the day. Every so often, the experienced woodcutter would sit down, pause, go away for a bit, take a break, while the other, younger, stronger woodcutter kept chopping. At the end of the day, the 2 woodcutters compared to see who had chopped more wood. The younger and stronger woodcutter was astonished to find that the older woodcutter, who'd kept taking breaks, had chopped a significantly greater amount of wood. He was like, how is that even possible? You spent far less time chopping than I did. I am stronger and I never once stopped. What was going on? And the experienced woodcutter turned to them and said, every time I stopped, I was sharpening my axe. And the person that read the version of the story, who I think did a much better job than I did, however, they read that story and they kind of then reflected back and they said, that's what we've been doing during this course. We've been sharpening our axe, or sharpening the saw, as the sort of the phrase goes. Now, the concept, this sharpening the saw for the short, oh dear, that's going to be hard for me, isn't it? Sharpening the saw comes from the book, The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People by Stephen Covey. Quite a classic book. I think while there's bits in it that you kind of have to, realign for the time. It was published in 1990. First published in 1990. It's definitely stood the test of time in terms of thinking about how you kind of individually and as a team and collectively can be successful or effective. And sharpening the saw, interestingly, is actually habit 7 of the 7 habits. So, yeah, why would I possibly start at the beginning of a book if I was going to share something for you? But it's what Stephen Covey says. It's the habit that makes all the other habits possible. So it is very, very core. And the way he's described it also resonates with a number of very other common kind of models that I know I have shared and often talk about. So he's talking about this habit of sharpening the saw. It's actually looking at this concept of renewal. His words are that we are instruments of our own performance. And as such, we have a real responsibility to look after ourselves. And that's the point. It's the habit that makes all the others possible, because it's the habits that keep you well. He divides it into 4 components: spiritual, physical, mental, and social. And if you think about that, hopefully that's really resonated in terms of a couple of things. There's the Tiamari model, Tafara Tabafa, that definitely resonates with those components. And the other model or tool that it resonates with or connects with is the manage your energy versus over your time rather than your time, which I first read about through an article in HBR. So I'll pop links to those 2 other models, as well as to the 7 habits of highly effective people, in the show notes. But it's this idea of using those 4 components. Now, what I like about this one, and again, it's the same as if you dive into any others, it's understanding what sits behind those words. So we'll take those 4 components. I've got the cat in here today, so this could be quite interesting because she does tend to generally sit on my notes. So there might be a lot of scurrying going on in the background as I try and find my notes, and then realise I'm wearing the wrong glasses anyway. So I'll quickly just shift the glasses as well while I'm nattering away to you in that calming, lovely voice that I'm sure you're all delighted by. Okay, so we'll start with the physical. We'll start with this physical element, because I think, and I'm certainly guilty of this, we kind of just tick that off. Oh yeah, I understand what that all means. And I was listening to something the other day, and it was really about the fact that our physical well-being is really core and never included in anything in any leadership development. How often in a leadership development program do you actually spend time thinking about your physical well-being, and what do you actually do? I was in an interview with someone once, and they were sharing the ways to stay well as a leader kind of answer. And they knew I walked quite a lot. That was one of my physical things that I did. And they said, I'm never going to be like you and do that walking, but this is what I could do. And it was quite refreshing, this idea of what do we physically need to do? And again, if we come back to Stephen Covey's words, we are the instruments of our own performance. Our physical bodies are therefore important to it and staying well. So there is what we eat, what we drink, how do we rest, our relaxation. And in the chapter in the book, he actually talks an awful lot about exercise. He frames this up quite significantly. That's definitely the focus for him. And the key points that he pulls out is that it's not a quick win. You know, you're not going to spurt off tomorrow and you'll suddenly become much more physically fit and all of that sort of stuff. So it's about being wise about what is the physical activity that's going to help you stay well. What's going to keep that saw. That's actually quite hard to say, short. Now, we're not going to do it. We're not going to do the sharpening your saw business. But also the other benefits of when you're physically active and you're exercising, there's the other benefits that you get, this sense of self-esteem, self-confidence, but also your integrity are all positively affected by having this regular physical exercise. Now, I'm known, and I share a lot on either my LinkedIn little videos or my Instagram stories around my regular walk around the park, and I'm now sitting here reading this about physical exercise because I didn't do that this morning. I decided to sit in the park and read a book instead. Anyway, tomorrow I'll be back at it. I'll get for that walk around the park again. So our physical component, really important there. The next component is the spiritual component. And I think the spiritual part it was really interesting the way he put it. It was around this value clarification. It was around this commitment to your value system. So there are many different ways, as he describes in the book, that people can find that spiritual renewal. And it's about the things that inspire and uplift you. So yes, there can be time spent in prayer, or time spent in meditation, or time spent in nature. But I liked that idea of it's the source of what inspires and uplifts you. And again, that's, the same with being wise over what is the right physical activity for you. The spiritual component of renewal is really important as well. And then The next component is that of the mental renewal. How are you going to sharpen your saw from a mental perspective? And what's really interesting, and this is where I checked out when this book was published. So yeah, first published in 1990. And in the chapter, he talks a lot about television and the amount of hours people are watching television. So this was from 1990. So the stats are probably well off. And it is probably increased. And we've now got phones and the internet and all of that. So I think this idea that in the mental renewal part, this very much around this focus and attention span, I think that's a really interesting component to re-review or look at or from this perspective and the context that we're in right now. But what I thought was also really interesting, while he talks a lot about television, he was actually very grateful for it. So while we often, when we're thinking about attention and renewal and stuff, we kind of like are very disparaging of any technology kind of stuff and the time spent on the TV and stuff. But he was talking about being very discriminate with the usage, and I think that's the key to today as much as it was then. That he finds that there's very informing and inspiring and entertaining things that he would watch on television, both individually and as a family. And he makes the point, and this connection with that it aligns with your values and what you're there to do and what your purpose is and all this sort of stuff. So while he talks about it being a very powerful influence, and that can go either way, right, for good or for bad. But generally, he was very grateful for it, but it puts it into this frame of being discriminate. The other things that fit into that mental renewal category and how we sharpen our saw mentally is through education. And the main ways he talks about that is reading, really, because he talks a lot about formal education, but given that this is being written for people who are now in work, he talks a lot about the value and the power in reading and how that can be found. And then takes it a step further in terms of writing. And this in particular is around journaling. And there's a lot of, I'm a big fan of journaling, and there's a lot of evidence around that as well. So I think that's, it's that space of where you can get clarity and you can kind of get some context and you can think about insights. So there's an awful lot of mental renewal that can come through this space of journaling and writing. And the other thing that I loved when I revisited this chapter was this idea of, in the mental renewal space, this idea of organising and planning. So actually that part of thinking about where are you getting to? What are my goals here? What do I need to do? What's my plan around this? Organising yourself, setting yourself up for success, very proactive. And with all of these, he connects them to the other habits. But I'm making an assumption you don't know the other 6 habits off the top of your head. So I'm just framing it around this idea that this organising and planning is very much part of this mental renewal that you've got. I do realise I'm really struggling with my words and actually just talking. And I probably at the start should have said, had a wisdom tooth out at the beginning of the week or the end of last week. And it's going okay. It's definitely not as painful as the dentist led me to believe that it might be at this point in the week. But it's definitely affecting. I've got this awful mouthwash I have to take, and it's really affecting how my mouth feels. So I'm really struggling with my words. So this will be a great one. Last week I forgot everything. This week I can't remember. I can't talk properly. This podcast is just going from good to great, isn't it, really? Anyway, where are we up to? So that was our mental renewal. And now we're into the social and emotional sharpening our saw. And these components that fit into this bit is around service and synergy and empathy. It's about creative cooperation and interpersonal leadership and empathy. So again, it connects into those value purposes about why we're here, but it's also about how we bring all those things together. And he gives examples of how you form those connections and those relationships with the people that you work with, and how you would draw on the other habits to enable those relationships to be the best that they can be. So it's this idea that we don't operate in a vacuum, that we need those connections, that we have different types of connections. So how do you think about those things? What's also interesting is that he takes these concepts and he goes, yes, we need to do this individually, and you can't neglect one over the other. But equally, a team or an organisation has to look at this in terms of sharpening our saw. And if we only focus on one component as an organisation or as a team, then you're not going to be as effective or successful as you might want to be. So it's around bringing those all together, which again aligns with how Te Wharatapa Whā and the model Manage Your Energy Over Your Time also thinks about this. So he's talking about renewal. Renewal is the process, and it's this idea that we are never done. And as I was thinking about this podcast and talking about sharpening your saw, and I was rereading the chapter and making some notes, this idea that we're never done, that renewal is the process, we're not completed. And as I'll often talk about, this is a long game that we're playing, so how do we sustain this? It reminded me of a quote that I've just read in another book I'm reading called Impact Players, and they actually reference, in that book it references the end of Becoming, written by Michelle Obama, and it's how she kind of wraps up the book, and she says, I am still in progress and I hope that I always will be. For me, becoming isn't about arriving somewhere or achieving a certain aim. I see it instead as forward motion, a means of evolving, a way to reach continuously towards a better self. Becoming is never giving up on the idea that there is more growing to be done. And I think that resonates completely with this idea of sharpening the saw, that we are never done. And it's why it connects, actually, I hadn't actually thought about this until just now, connects with why I call the weekly email I write the I Am No Jedi. This idea that we are not suddenly becoming Jedi masters in the art of leading in healthcare, that we are always learners, that we're always developing, we've always got some work to think about and to sharpen our saw on, and that those are the ways that we are able to continue working, and not only continue working and be well at working, but also to work more efficiently than if we were to just slog it away. We need to take those moments out to stop and consider those components in whichever way you feel is the most appropriate to enable your saw to be sharpened. In the end of the chapter, he talks about this idea of, it's kind of like and so what? What are you going to do with this now? And he has this phrase about, so you learn and then you commit and then you do. So it's very important that you actually take some action. And at the end of the book, he gives you a couple of questions. So I'm going to share those questions now. And he calls it this upward spiral because you just keep going, right? So you learn, and now by listening to this podcast, you've learned something. You've learnt about the 7 habits of highly effective people. You've considered this idea of renewal and this process of how we maintain ourselves in order to be the instruments of our performance, and the 4 components that we do that through: physical, spiritual, mental and social and emotional emotional and process. So that's the learning part. And then it's about the commit. So what are you going to do? What are you going to do? So he calls it application suggestions, and he says, make a list of activities that would help you keep in good physical shape, that are going to fit your lifestyle and that you can enjoy. So, very sensible, fit into your lifestyle, think about the context, and that you're going to enjoy. Then select one of those activities and list it as a goal in your personal role area for the coming week. At the end of the week, evaluate your performance. If you didn't make your goal, was it because you kind of didn't act in alignment with your values, or where was it that you fell over? Have a think about why was it that you didn't make that goal. And then you've done, then you're learning, and then you recommit for the following week. So it's a very simple kind of almost like that plan, do, study, act kind of process, that continuous improvement. These all kind of connect. There is no one and true answer. They are all synergistic and they are all kind of borrowing off each other. So you can do that for each of those 4 areas. That's what he says. He makes a similar list of renewing activities in your spiritual and mental dimensions. And then he says, hold on, the light's now gone in the room, so this is getting him even more hysterical, trying to read, the cat's moving around. Have you got a real image? This is why I don't do a video podcast. Can you imagine it? Okay, all right, we're there now. So he talks about making a list of similar list for renewing activities in your spiritual and mental dimensions. But in your social emotional area, he says list relationships you would like to improve, or specific circumstances where you think you could bring greater effectiveness. And then select one item in each area as, again, your list goal for the week. And then implement that, so do that, and then evaluate it. And so this idea of thinking about through the week, where are my opportunities to sharpen my saw? Because this is about making this a regular activity. So for me, it is my walk around the park, my regular reflection journaling that I do. And then there is the way I engage and interact with the clients that I see. I think that's the social kind of thing that connects with my idea of service. And then the time I spend in meditation and that reflective kind of quite inward time, those 4 elements. And am I doing those bits every day and reflecting on what am I getting from that? What is that supporting? What is that helping? So we've now all got our lists of ways to make that a learn, commit and do activity. Got some ideas about sharpening the saw and realizing that constant beating and trying to just work harder doesn't actually support you in terms of being the instrument of your performance. And I loved that. Clearly that phrase has resonated. And I shared again about why I call the weekly email the No Jedi email. So you can sign up for that at www.katiequinney.com/subscribe. Is it forward or backward? I never remember that. Every time I say that out loud, it's really quite incredible that I've got this far in life. So you can subscribe to that, and this idea that these are each week you get an idea, a couple of ideas or something you can just grab hold and go, let's give that a go. Or that's going to give me a bit of hope or inspiration. It's aimed to be a bright spot in your inbox every week. Thank you again for listening, tuning in. I sound like a radio person now. Good Lord. Listening to another episode of the Leadership Lounge. It's been great to go over the Sharpening the Saw. It's given me quite a few ideas for this week as well, and the weeks to come, in terms of how I continue that renewal process. But hopefully you've got some ideas around that as well. I'd love it if you would click along and follow the podcast on whichever channel you are listening to, and give it a rate or a review. That would be awesome, because that will help other people find this podcast. And please do share it with the other people that you are working with as leaders in healthcare. I'm Katie, I'm your host. It's been a pleasure to go through this chapter from the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People with you this week, and I will be back with some more insights and fresh perspectives for your work as a leader in healthcare next week in another episode of the Leadership Lounge. Take care, have fun.